Jack woke before dawn, as he had every day for the past decade. The town of Cedar Ridge lay quiet beneath a pale mist, the kind that softened the edges of reality and made the world seem suspended in time. He laced his running shoes with the precision of a man who had learned to prepare for everything, checked the straps twice, and set off down the empty streets. The cool autumn air filled his lungs, a crispness that reminded him of mornings long ago, in places far removed from the peace he now sought. Life had slowed for Jack since retiring from the Navy SEALs. Once, his days had been measured in missions, objectives, and the unyielding rhythm of combat. Now they were measured in smaller things: the way sunlight fell across his backyard, the quiet hum of traffic on the nearby highway, the laughter of children playing a block away. And most of all, in the woman who had somehow pulled him from the shadow of war into a life of mundane happiness. Was everything Jack had never allowed himself to hope for. She was gentle yet fierce, with a laugh that could pierce the heaviest of silences and a patience that seemed limitless. Each morning, she walked to the local school where she taught third grade, and each evening she returned with stories of small triumphs, of shy students finding confidence, of parents discovering the impact of a single kind word. Jack admired her, sometimes from afar, still struggling to reconcile the violence he had seen and the quiet serenity she embodied. That morning, Jack's routine was interrupted by a small anomaly, a noise he almost didn't hear, a faint disturbance from the nearby woods. He slowed his pace, scanning the tree line with a trained eye, noting the subtle shifts in shadows, the way a branch had fallen in an unnatural pattern. His heart beat not with fear but with awareness. Even here in Cedar Ridge, the world was unpredictable, and Jack had learned long ago that unpredictability could be deadly. But the sound proved to be nothing more than a raccoon scurrying along the brush, and he allowed himself a small exhale of relief. The calm of Cedar Ridge returned, and he continued his run, each stride a meditation on the simple, almost foreign concept of normal life. By the time he returned home, was already in the kitchen preparing breakfast. The aroma of coffee and eggs greeted him, a comfort more profound than any debriefing room or hotel room overseas. They spoke in soft murmurs, a quiet intimacy that didn't require words to convey the depth of connection. Jack admired the way she moved, her hands fluid and confident, a graceful rhythm that contrasted sharply with the abruptness and precision that had defined his former existence. He sipped his coffee, savoring the warmth that seemed to seep into his bones, a counterpoint to the chill of the morning air. "Rough night?" asked, noticing the tension he hadn't intended to hide. Her eyes, always perceptive, caught the subtle furrow of his brow, the brief tightening of his jaw. Jack shook his head, offering only a small, tight smile. "Just the usual," he said, a half-truth and a necessary one. His nights were often restless. Memories of missions, of faces blurred in smoke and gunfire, visited him unpredictably. But he had grown skilled at compartmentalizing, at placing the past in a box and walking away, even if only for a few hours of peace. After breakfast, kissed him lightly on the cheek before heading out the door. Jack watched her walk to her car, her figure bathed in the morning light. He wanted to protect her, not just from the minor dangers of daily life, but from the more insidious ones he knew lurked in the world, a world she had been shielded from until now. The thought lingered, unsettling and persistent, but he pushed it aside, focusing instead on his small acts of normalcy, washing dishes, checking his gear, making sure the house was orderly. The day passed quietly. Jack repaired a fence along the property line, mowed the lawn, and ran errands into town, all under the serene, watchful eyes of the surrounding hills. Cedar Ridge was a town that prided itself on safety, a place where neighbors waved as they passed and doors were rarely locked. Jack knew better than to fully trust appearances. Experience had taught him that danger could appear anywhere, often where it was least expected. Still, for a few hours, he allowed himself the illusion of safety. It was late afternoon when the phone rang, the sound slicing through the comfortable silence of the house. Jack answered to hear her voice, shaky and frightened. She was at the gas station near the edge of town, and something had gone wrong. Jack's heart rate spiked instantly, a reflex honed from years of responding to threats that came without warning. He didn't think, he moved. His car roared to life, tires gripping the asphalt as he sped through the town, mind calculating every second, every route, every possibility. When he arrived, the scene was chaotic. A group of local thugs had cornered, and one of them had struck her, knocking her to the ground. Jack's eyes narrowed, recognizing the strike from the video that would later circulate online. The world seemed to slow for him, each movement of the attackers exaggerated and clear. Stunned and hurt, struggled to her feet, her eyes wide as she tried to defend herself. Jack's instincts surged, every muscle, every fiber of his being recognized the wrongness of the situation. By the time the men fled, was bruised and trembling. A bystander had captured part of the attack on their phone, but no one had intervened. Jack helped her into his car, keeping his voice calm even as his mind raced. "You're safe now," he murmured, though the lie stung. He knew Cedar Ridge might never feel truly safe again. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that would heal physically, but the trauma was deeper, invisible, lingering. Jack sat by her side, silent and watchful, a storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. For the first time in years, he felt the familiar, dangerous pull of the man he had been, a man who took action where others hesitated, who delivered justice when the system failed. That night in the darkness of their bedroom, Jack replayed the video over and over, memorizing faces, movements, and vehicles. He didn't feel fear. He felt a cold, precise anger, the kind that demanded resolution. Slept beside him, unaware of the full depth of the fire she had rekindled. Jack stared at the ceiling, knowing that his life of quiet peace had shattered in an instant, and that some part of him, the part trained for combat, trained to protect at any cost, would never be the same again. And in that silence, a vow formed, unspoken but resolute. Anyone who hurt her would discover exactly what happens when you cross a Navy SEAL. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic, a sterile scent that clashed with the raw fear lingering in his chest. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands pressed to the bruises blossoming across her cheek, the dull ache behind her eye reminding her of the violence that had invaded her life. The pain wasn't just physical. It was the abrupt violation of a world she had always felt safe in, a reminder that safety was an illusion. Jack stood nearby, silent, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. He had never liked hospitals. The sterile brightness, the beeping monitors, the way people walked in hurriedly as if time were irrelevant. It all reminded him of missions gone wrong, of moments when even milliseconds mattered. But today it was different. Today, the hospital wasn't a battlefield, but the enemy had already struck, and Jack felt every second of that attack in his bones. Flinched as a nurse adjusted the bandages around her temple. I can't believe it," she whispered, voice trembling. "No one even stopped them." She glanced toward Jack, eyes wide. "Why would anyone?" Jack's face remained unreadable, the storm inside him carefully contained. "Because people think someone else will intervene," he said quietly. "Because they underestimate the wrong person." He didn't elaborate, didn't need to hear the violent clarity that had been rising inside him since the attack. Instead, he simply held her gaze, silently promising her that no one would hurt her again, not if he could prevent it. The sheriff had opened a report, but it was procedural at best. There was no video evidence except what a bystander had recorded on their phone, and that footage was partial, grainy, and frustratingly incomplete. Witnesses were hesitant, afraid of the retaliation that often followed such incidents. Jack listened to the sheriff's polite but ineffective assurances, nodding along, though inside, he was already making plans. He knew the system wasn't designed for moments like this. The law worked in broad strokes, not precise strikes. Justice, when delayed or diluted, often failed. That evening, when had finally been discharged, Jack drove them home in silence. Cedar Ridge passed by in streaks of streetlights and shadow, the town that had always felt quiet and safe now seeming strangely alien. Leaned against the window, exhausted and vulnerable. I don't want to leave the house alone," she admitted softly. Jack's hands tightened on the wheel, jaw clenching. She didn't need to fear, he would make sure of it. but he also knew that fear was not something easily removed. Trauma left marks deeper than bruises, scars invisible to the eye but impossible to ignore. Once home, Jack guided to the couch, helping her settle under a blanket. He poured 2 glasses of water, and for a few moments they sat together in quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the creak of the old wooden floorboards. His breathing gradually slowed, and Jack allowed himself a brief exhale. But the calm was deceptive. His mind raced. Names, faces, vehicles, routines, the video, the incomplete evidence, all were analyzed with the precision that had defined him in combat. Patterns emerged, clues appeared, and somewhere in that haze he saw a path forward, a way to ensure this never happened again. Jack's first step was to retrace movements. He examined every detail she could recall: the time she stopped for gas, the man who had lingered near the pumps, the group that had emerged from the shadows. He cross-referenced it with the video from the bystander, each frame slowed, analyzed. The attackers were ordinary-looking, blending easily into the everyday landscape of the town. But Jack knew better. Ordinary men often carried extraordinary danger if left unchecked. The next day, Jack visited the gas station. Employees remembered her visit vividly, some whispering apologies, others casting uneasy glances at him as if sensing the controlled intensity radiating from him. He asked questions carefully, subtly, listening more than speaking. Small details emerged: a car parked slightly off, a man who lingered too long, the scent of alcohol on the breath of one of the attackers. Each detail was a piece of a puzzle, each observation adding to a growing map of criminal patterns. Jack didn't yet act. He didn't need to. Observation, patience, and precision were his allies. As Jack compiled the details, tried to maintain normalcy, though it was impossible. She returned to school, to her students, but the laughter of children, the small triumphs she once cherished, now felt distant. Fear lingered in her chest like a heavy weight. She avoided empty streets, kept her phone close, and flinched at sudden noises. Jack noticed it all, but he refrained from overreacting. He had trained himself to read danger without letting it consume his emotions. His job was to protect, and he would. By evening, Jack sat alone in the study, the house quiet around him. He replayed the video again and again, pausing to note movements, gestures, and timing. His old SEAL training resurfaced, muscles tensing as he calculated distances, escape routes, and angles. Every move of the attackers was scrutinized, cataloged, and stored in his memory. He wasn't yet seeking revenge. This was reconnaissance, strategy. But the fire inside him grew, a controlled burn that promised consequences to those who thought they could act with impunity. Watched him from the doorway, concern etched on her face. "Jack, please don't," she whispered, though her words carried more fear for the man he might become than for herself. Jack turned, his expression unreadable. "I'm not going to let them get away with this," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Not her, not anyone like her." Nodded, uncertain whether to trust the man she loved or fear the warrior he still carried inside. That night, Jack sat by the window, staring out at the quiet streets of Cedar Ridge. The moonlight painted everything silver, serene, ordinary. And yet he knew that ordinary had been shattered. Somewhere out there, the men who struck were alive, walking freely, believing they had escaped consequences. Jack's mind raced through scenarios, possibilities, contingencies. He was no longer just a husband protecting his wife. He was a strategist, a predator in the calm, preparing for the storm he knew was inevitable. He whispered to the night, a promise to the darkness: "Anyone who hurts her will regret it. Anyone who crosses this line will find out exactly what happens when you cross a Navy SEAL." And in that quiet moment slept, unaware of the preparations, the plans, and the controlled violence slowly awakening in the man she loved. For Jack, the peaceful life he had built was gone. In its place rose a singular focus: justice, precision, and the protection of the woman who had unwittingly reignited a war he thought he had left behind. The morning air was crisp, and Cedar Ridge seemed to move at its usual slow pace, but for Jack, the world had shifted. Gone was the calm of domestic life, replaced with an acute awareness of every shadow, every movement, every potential threat. He sat at his kitchen table, laptop open, coffee untouched, eyes scanning the partial video of his attack that had circulated online. Grainy as it was, it provided vital clues. The attackers' faces were partially obscured, but their postures, gait, and even subtle hand movements revealed patterns only someone trained could detect. Jack knew instinct alone would not suffice. He needed information, details that would expose not only the individuals who assaulted but also the network that enabled them. From his seat, he began to compile lists: suspicious vehicles, known criminal contacts, previous altercations, and any reports of gang activity within the surrounding counties. Hours passed like minutes, his mind working in tactical rhythm, as if each keystroke was part of a covert operation. He printed a map of Cedar Ridge and the surrounding areas, marking locations of interest in neat, precise symbols. Gas stations, abandoned warehouses, back alleys, and businesses with frequent police calls were all circled in black ink. Next, he began plotting times, looking for patterns in the video and witness reports. The attackers had been deliberate. They weren't random hoodlums but individuals operating under instruction, likely tied to a local criminal enterprise. By mid-afternoon, Jack's concentration was unbroken, his focus absolute. Entered the study quietly, carrying a small tray with sandwiches and a thermos of tea. She set it down, hesitant to disturb him. "Jack, you've been at this for hours," she said softly. He didn't look up. "I'm close," he said. His voice was calm, almost detached, but could feel the tension coiled in it. "I just need to know who did this and why." Sat beside him, reaching for his hand. "Just be careful," she whispered. Jack briefly glanced at her, eyes softening for the first time that day, but then his gaze returned to the screen. The truth was, he had no intention of being careful, not if it meant these men could hurt her again. Jack's investigation led him to an unsettling realization. The attackers were connected to a small, organized gang operating under the radar of local law enforcement. A few minor arrests here and there, mostly ignored or dismissed, painted a picture of habitual criminality. One name kept surfacing: Randy Cole, a local enforcer with ties to illegal arms, stolen vehicles, and narcotics. Cole was known for violent tendencies, a man who thrived on intimidation and power, the sort who would see someone like as a mere obstacle, not a person. The more Jack uncovered, the more his strategy took shape. This was no longer about chasing criminals on a whim. It was about dismantling a network systematically, like he had done in theaters of war overseas. Surveillance became the next step. He rented a small car, nondescript, and spent hours circling neighborhoods, knotting license plates, observing behaviors, and committing faces to memory. The gang's patterns emerged slowly. Cars parked at odd times, individuals loitering near warehouses, and deliveries that arrived late at night under suspicious circumstances. Jack knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed someone who understood operational strategy, someone who could help him navigate the gray areas between legality and necessity. He reached out to a former SEAL teammate who now worked in private security, had retired from the military as well, but retained contacts and expertise that could be invaluable. They met at a small, both men keeping their conversation low and precise. "Jack, you really want to do this?" asked, leaning back, arms crossed. His eyes were sharp, assessing not just the plan but the man before him. "You could get yourself arrested, or worse." Jack's response was measured, almost eerily calm. "I'm not going to sit and wait for them to hurt her or someone else. I need to know everything, who they are, what they're capable of, and how they're organized." Studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we do this smart, not blind rage." He pulled out a small notebook and began listing contacts, safe houses, surveillance tools, and prior intel he could access. Jack's meticulous mind absorbed it all. Together, they created a plan that blended patience, reconnaissance, and tactical action. Each step had a purpose, each movement calculated. Meanwhile, recovery continued at home. She tried to resume her normal life, but the fear lingered. Small noises startled her, shadows seemed more menacing than they had before, and the memory of the blow to her face replayed itself unbidden. Jack noticed every flinch, every hesitation. It drove him further. Each detail of her fear reinforced his resolve. The calm man she married was gone. In his place was a guardian, precise, patient, and relentless. Days turned into a week, and Jack's surveillance bore fruit. He observed key members of the gang making late-night deliveries, exchanging small packages, and meeting in secluded locations. The pieces of the puzzle began to align. The attack on was not random. It had purpose. It was intimidation, a show of power. And Jack, trained in reading human behavior, saw weakness beneath the bravado. He began mapping escape routes, noting entry points, and understanding their routines. One evening, Jack reviewed the data they had collected. "Randy Cole," Jack muttered, pointing at a photo captured from a distance. "He's the orchestrator. Everything points back to him. The men who hit were just the foot soldiers." Nodded grimly. "If he's connected to the local officials like I've heard, it's going to get messy." Jack's eyes narrowed. Messy is fine. What's not fine is letting them think they can get away with this. He paused, scanning the photos again. "We strike when we know exactly what's happening. No mistakes, precision." Jack began preparing his own gear, cleaning his old weapons, checking optics, and reviewing tactical manuals he had kept from his SEAL days. Each tool was inspected, each angle rehearsed mentally. He moved silently through the house at night, ensuring no detail was overlooked. Watched him, worried but understanding that this was who he was, a man trained to protect, to strike only when necessary, and to do so with calculated efficiency. Through careful observation, Jack noted a pattern. The gang conducted meetings at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town every Tuesday night. It was lightly guarded but overlooked by law enforcement, a blind spot ripe for surveillance. Jack began staking the location, studying the comings and goings, noting license plates, body language, and weapons carried. Every detail mattered. Every movement added to the tactical picture forming in his mind. As the days passed, Jack's transformation became evident. He moved through the town with quiet purpose, blending in while analyzing everything. Neighbors remarked on his intensity, sensing the change but unaware of its cause. Noticed it too, the quiet energy radiating from him, a controlled storm that promised consequences. Jack's patience, focus, and methodical approach mirrored the precision of his military days. By the end of the week, Jack had a clear picture of the gang's hierarchy, routines, and weaknesses. Every observation, every piece of intel, pointed toward one undeniable truth: the attack-on was not isolated. It was part of a network of intimidation and violence that had terrorized the town quietly for years. Jack's resolve. He wasn't just a husband protecting his wife. He was a warrior preparing for a battle in a world that thought it was safe from him. That night Jack sat by the window again, the faint glow of the town lights illuminating his face. He reflected on what he had learned. The network, the enforcers, the leader, everything was mapped in his mind, a tactical blueprint ready for execution. Slept peacefully beside him, unaware of the storm quietly forming outside their door. Jack whispered into the darkness, a promise to the night and to himself. "I will find them. I will stop them. And anyone who hurt her will face what they cannot imagine." The calm of Cedar Ridge was deceptive. A silent war had begun, one man against a network of criminals, guided by precision, patience, and the unyielding resolve of a Navy SEAL. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Cedar Ridge, but Jack was far from its warmth. He stood in the quiet of his garage, the soft hum of the heater competing with the faint rustle of papers spread across the workbench. Maps, photographs, and notes were meticulously arranged, a tactical blueprint of the small criminal network that had dared to strike his wife. Each detail was deliberate: entrances, exits, blind spots, patrol patterns, and timing. Jack's mind worked with the precision of a surgeon, honed through years of missions where hesitation meant death. Arrived shortly thereafter, parking his unmarked car behind the garage. He stepped inside, eyes scanning the organized chaos with a mix of respect and concern. "You've really gone all in," he said quietly. "I didn't think you'd ever set up something like this again." Jack didn't look up. He continued tracing routes on the map, noting key positions. "I didn't set this up," he said. "I'm preparing. Preparation is the only thing that separates survival from failure." Nodded, accepting the response. He understood Jack's obsession. He had fought alongside him in countless operations, seen that cold, unflinching focus that separated elite soldiers from the rest. "All right," said, kneeling beside the workbench. "Let's go through it. Start from the beginning." Jack pointed to a cluster of buildings on the outskirts of town. "The gang's meetings occur here every Tuesday night. Lightly guarded, but the location is overlooked by authorities. Surveillance is easy if we stay hidden." He tapped photographs of vehicles, body angles, and individuals, each noted meticulously. "Cole isn't always present. He sends enforcers ahead of him. We need to understand their hierarchy before we strike. We don't improvise, we execute with precision." Studied the photos. "So this isn't about vengeance yet. You're building intelligence first. That's smart." Jack's lips tightened. "Vengeance comes later if necessary. Right now, I need to dismantle their operations in a way that protects anyone else who might get caught in their games. Precision, control, timing, these are our allies." Once the tactical discussion concluded, Jack turned his attention to gear. He had stored much of his old SEAL equipment in the garage: firearms, tactical knives, optics, and communication devices, each cleaned and maintained meticulously. Each item told a story, a silent reminder of the missions he had executed with lethal efficiency. Now, that skill set was being repurposed for a different kind of battle. One fought not overseas, but in the streets of a town that had never imagined a man like Jack walking among them. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack practiced movements silently in the garage, shadowboxing his plan with the precision of a trained predator. He mapped out entry points and exit routes in his mind, imagined contingencies for every possible variable. Every step of the gang's potential response was anticipated, every misstep accounted for. Watched quietly, recognizing the disciplined intensity that defined Jack. This wasn't rage. It was strategy, a mental preparation honed over years of combat where lives, including his own, depended on flawless execution. While Jack prepared tactically, he also reflected on. He pictured her walking to work, her laughter echoing in his mind, a constant reminder of why he was doing this. Protecting her wasn't about ego or pride, it was about principle. It was about sending a message that violence against the innocent would not go unpunished. And yet, he understood that each step he took into this world of shadows and danger also carried risks. He could be arrested, injured, or worse. But his resolve was unwavering. The cost of inaction was far greater. Night fell over Cedar Ridge, and Jack moved to the surveillance stage. From a parked vehicle on a quiet street, they observed the warehouse compound where the gang gathered. Jack's eyes scanned every movement, noting vehicles that came and went, individuals who lingered too long, and the subtle shifts in guard patterns. He made mental notes, cataloged names and behaviors, and mentally rehearsed the infiltration. Each observation reinforced a chilling truth. The men who had struck were organized, violent, and unpredictable. Precision would be the only thing that kept Jack and anyone else from being injured. During a break, leaned back in his seat. "You're methodical," he said quietly. "Obsessed, almost, but that's what you need to be." Jack didn't respond immediately. His eyes remained on the building, noting the flicker of lights and the shadows cast by individuals moving inside. "It's not obsession," he finally said. "It's necessary. We don't get a second chance. One mistake, one lapse in judgment, and she suffers again. I will not allow that. Not her. Not anyone who crosses this line." Jack's words weren't threats. They were promises. He had learned the hard way in war that preparation, patience, and precision were the most powerful weapons one could wield. And now, those weapons were being turned inward, focused on a small criminal operation that believed it could act with impunity. Over the next few days, Jack and continued their reconnaissance, observing patterns and noting vulnerabilities. They tracked movements of vehicles, behaviors of gang members, and shifts in guard rotations. Every detail added to the strategic map on the garage wall, transforming it from a collection of observations into a comprehensive operational blueprint. Jack also began mental rehearsals, imagining every possible outcome. If an ambush occurred, he visualized escape routes and countermeasures. If backup arrived, he calculated contingencies. Each scenario was run through methodically, each outcome considered, each variable accounted for. He was no longer a man merely planning for confrontation. He was preparing for controlled execution, an operation designed to deliver justice without unnecessary chaos. Watched from a distance, worried about the intensity that consumed Jack. She saw the late nights, the quiet focus, the meticulous attention to detail. But she also saw the restraint. Despite the anger that simmered beneath the surface, Jack had not acted impulsively. This was a calculated, measured approach, a careful, lethal dance choreographed in advance. She feared for him, but also knew that he would not allow harm to come to anyone he loved. One evening, Jack reviewed the notes with finalizing the plan. "We act when we know exactly what's happening," he said. "Timing, control, and precision. No mistakes. We strike once and we strike decisively." Nodded, understood, but you need to remember something. Once you go down this road, there's no turning back. You'll be in a different world entirely. Jack's gaze hardened, eyes scanning the photos of Randy Cole and his enforcers. "I've walked that world before. I know the cost, and I'll pay it if it means protecting her." Night fell and the town of Cedar Ridge slept peacefully, oblivious to the storm gathering at its outskirts. Jack's house, once a haven of domestic tranquility, was now the nerve center of a carefully plotted operation. Every map, every note, every observation was a step closer to justice. And somewhere in the darkness, the gang continued their routines, unaware that the calm they assumed was their ally had been shattered by a man who never forgot, never hesitated, and never allowed anyone to threaten the people he loved without consequence. Jack lingered by the window, watching the faint glow of streetlights on empty streets. He whispered a promise into the night. "I will strike with precision. I will protect her. And anyone who crosses this line will discover exactly what happens when you cross a Navy SEAL." In that moment, Cedar Ridge was quiet, but the war had already begun. And Jack, retired SEAL turned silent guardian, was ready to deliver a lesson that no criminal in that town would ever forget. The night was heavy with fog, the kind that swallowed sound and blurred shapes at a distance. Jack crouched behind a line of overgrown brush, eyes fixed on the warehouse at the edge of town. Every detail he had observed over the past week, the vehicles, the guard rotations, the patterns of comings and goings, was stored in his mind like coordinates in a mental map. His heart beat steady, not from fear, but from anticipation. Tonight, the first phase of his plan would be executed. Crouched beside him, silent as the shadows themselves. "You ready?" he whispered. Jack didn't answer immediately. He inhaled, adjusted the strap on his backpack, and allowed himself a moment to focus. He wasn't just attacking criminals. He was delivering justice, protecting and ensuring that no one would ever feel the helplessness she had endured. Precision, timing, control. These were the tools of his trade, the ones that had kept him alive in far worse situations. Jack slipped forward, a shadow among shadows, moving closer to the warehouse with silent steps. The fog clung to his jacket, masking his presence, just as he had practiced countless times in training. His eyes scanned every window, every doorway, every reflection in the dimly lit parking lot. He noted the guards, 2 men stationed at opposite ends, chatting lazily, unaware of the storm approaching. Jack's mind cataloged angles, distances, timing, calculating the exact moment to strike. Inside the warehouse, the gang operated with the careless arrogance of men who believed themselves untouchable. Packages were exchanged, a ledger was passed around, and laughter echoed against the high ceilings. They were organized, coordinated, but unprepared. Jack watched, noting every shift in stance, every hand motion, every glance. The moment of action approached, and the calm predator within him rose to the surface. With covering a flank, Jack made his move. He slipped through a side entrance, silent and controlled, the soft click of his boots on the cold concrete unnoticed. His first target, a guard leaning against a stack of crates, never saw him approach. A precise strike, minimal force, maximum effect, rendered the man unconscious. Jack moved like water flowing through the space, each step calculated, each action deliberate. Every movement was practiced, refined, honed over years of military operations. The next guard barely had time to react. Jack's presence was sudden, overwhelming, impossible to anticipate. He subdued the man swiftly, leaving him bound and silent. The other gang members began to notice the anomaly, the disruption, but panic was slow to spread. Jack used it to his advantage, creating confusion, exploiting fear without escalating chaos unnecessarily. He wasn't here to kill recklessly. He was here to neutralize, to control, and to gather intelligence. Through the shadows, Jack moved toward the center of the warehouse, where he could observe the remaining gang members. He identified two men who had participated directly in the attack on. Their faces were seared into his memory, and now they would face him. Jack approached them silently, positioning himself where he could be seen but not immediately engaged. The fear in their eyes, subtle but undeniable, was satisfying, not for cruelty, but as a confirmation that he had regained control. "Did you enjoy hurting her?" Jack's voice was low, calm, almost casual, echoing off the metal walls. The words carried weight, a promise of consequences, and the men froze. One of them stammered, "We didn't mean." Jack stepped closer, the distance calculated to intimidate, yet not provoke panic that might endanger others. "Intentions don't matter. Actions do," he said. "And tonight, you're going to understand exactly what happens when someone crosses the line." The two men tried to resist, but Jack was methodical. Using techniques that combined leverage, speed, and precision, he incapacitated them quickly, ensuring they were unharmed but unable to continue their criminal activity. Moved in silently, helping secure the perimeter. The remaining gang members began to panic, realizing that their operation had been compromised in minutes. Confusion spread like wildfire, amplifying Jack's advantage. Jack's eyes scanned the warehouse for additional threats. Every corner was checked, every doorway secured. Packages containing illegal items, small arms, stolen electronics, and unmarked cash were cataloged for evidence. He documented what he could photograph without drawing attention, ensuring that his actions could later be justified if authorities questioned him. Discipline, he reminded himself, was the difference between justice and recklessness. As he prepared to leave, Jack left a message etched into one of the walls, a warning for anyone who thought they could continue their criminal activity unchallenged. He stepped back, surveying the scene. Guards unconscious but unharmed, key evidence documented, and the gang's operations momentarily crippled. The message was clear. Cedar Ridge was no longer a safe playground for criminals. Outside, the fog still clung to the ground, masking their retreat. Jack moved silently, slipping back into the darkness. No one followed and no one interfered. The first strike was a success, executed with precision and minimal risk. Jack felt a brief satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. There were still leaders to confront, and the storm had only just begun to gather. Back at his home, Jack cleaned and checked his gear meticulously. Every weapon, every strap, every tactical piece of equipment was inspected, maintained, and stored. Sat nearby, quietly reviewing the intel they had gathered during the strike. "You were surgical," he said. "No mistakes, no panic, no collateral damage. Impressive." Jack allowed a brief nod of acknowledgement. "Precision," he said simply. "That's what keeps people alive. That's what keeps me in control." Was unaware of the full extent of what had transpired that night. She noticed only the quiet confidence in Jack's demeanor, the subtle change in his presence, a calm that carried weight, like a predator who had reclaimed the territory. She felt safer, but also increasingly aware that the man she loved carried a darkness tempered by discipline. The aftermath of the first strike rippled quietly through Cedar Ridge. Rumors spread of a shadowy figure disrupting criminal operations, of a man who moved with impossible speed and precision. The gang was rattled. Fear and uncertainty replaced their usual arrogance. Jack had delivered his first message. Crossing, had consequences that could not be ignored. As Jack lay awake that night, he reflected on the operation. Success had been measured not just in the incapacitation of the attackers, but in the restoration of control, his own, and the balance in a town that had once been complacent. He knew the work was far from finished. Randy Cole, the leader behind the operation, remained at large. The gang was disoriented, but they would regroup. And when they did, Jack would be ready. He whispered into the quiet of the night, a vow to himself and to, "This is only the beginning. Anyone who dares harm her again will face the consequences, precise and unavoidable." The first confrontation was complete, but the war had only just begun. And Cedar Ridge, a town that had believed itself safe, would soon learn that a retired Navy SEAL could strike like a ghost, unseen but impossible to ignore. The morning sun spilled over Cedar Ridge, soft and deceptive, masking the tension that had taken root in the town. Jack was already awake, moving through his home with quiet precision. Coffee brewed on the counter, but he barely noticed the aroma. His mind was alert, scanning the perimeter, reviewing surveillance and anticipating threats. The first strike had been a success, but Jack knew better than to assume the enemy would remain dormant. Retaliation was inevitable. Stirred from her sleep, the faint shadows of bruises still visible on her face. She yawned, unaware of the tension radiating from Jack as he checked doors and windows with methodical care. "Morning," she whispered, voice soft and tired. Jack's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, the calm she relied on flickering across his features. But the warrior within him remained poised, ready to defend. "Morning," he replied, keeping his voice light, though every muscle in his body remained coiled for action. The tranquility of the morning shattered with the first sign of danger. A vehicle idling across the street, its engine cutting low, then silent. Jack's sharp eyes picked up the subtle cues immediately. The tinted windows, the slight tremble of the exhaust, and the presence of two men who had been associated with Randy Cole's gang. He moved like a shadow, positioning himself between and the street. Noticed the change instantly. "Jack, what is it?" she whispered, clutching the blanket closer. Jack didn't answer. His attention was on the movement outside. Every scenario played through his mind: escape routes, barriers, cover. Years of training merged with instinct. He wasn't panicked, he was calculating. The gang had struck again, attempting to intimidate him by targeting the one he loved most. But Jack was ready. As the men approached, stepping out of the car, he activated a small surveillance camera in the corner, documenting the intruders' identities and behavior. He moved swiftly, positioning himself where he could intercept them without alerting, who remained partially hidden behind the couch. The first man reached the front door, trying the handle. Jack was on him before he could react, leveraging his and skill to subdue the man silently. A second followed, and Jack neutralized him just as efficiently. The sounds of struggle were muffled, precise, and controlled. No one else in the neighborhood stirred. Jack's execution left nothing but the unconscious bodies of the intruders and the faint hum of the camera capturing every detail. His eyes widened, a mixture of awe and fear. "Jack, how?" she began, but he silenced her with a glance. "Stay calm, just stay behind me." With the immediate threat neutralized, Jack secured the men, tying them and ensuring they couldn't interfere further. He examined them closely. These were not the masterminds, but enforcers sent to send a message. Their fear was palpable, and Jack noted it meticulously. They had underestimated him, as most did. Mistake number one. Once the men were incapacitated, Jack reviewed the footage captured on his small device. Every movement, every attempt at intimidation was recorded. These men would lead him to the next layer of the operation, the heart of the gang, Randy Cole himself. Jack's mind raced with strategies: anticipating their connections, safe houses, and the likely patterns they would follow in regrouping. Finally stepped forward, her voice shaky. They came here. They almost. She stopped, realizing the extent of what Jack had done. Her fear was palpable, but so was a flicker of admiration. She saw the quiet control, the deliberate action, the precision with which he protected her. And yet she worried for the man she loved, knowing that every act of defense brought Jack closer to danger himself. Jack gently guided her back to the couch. "You're safe now," he said, though the words carried the weight of experience. "They won't reach you again, not if I can help it." He checked the doors once more, ensuring locks were secure, then reviewed the scene outside. Every exit route, every potential approach had been anticipated. Preparation was the difference between survival and catastrophe. The intruders were bound and silent, but Jack knew the message they carried had not yet reached the gang's leadership. Retaliation would escalate. He needed to be ready, not just for physical confrontation, but for the psychological warfare that Cole's organization would attempt. Fear, intimidation, and unpredictability were their tools. Jack's counter was precision, control, and anticipation. Hours passed, the town appearing calm, deceptively normal. Tried to maintain a sense of routine, checking her phone, tidying the house, attempting to reclaim normalcy. But the tension lingered, a silent presence that neither could ignore. Jack remained vigilant, moving from room to room, checking windows, scanning cameras, and reviewing notes on the gang's behavior. Every detail mattered. Every second of observation strengthened his control. Late in the afternoon, Jack traced the likely movements of Randy Cole's operatives through the town. He noted who had communicated with whom, what routes they favored, and the timing of their deliveries. His investigation revealed that Cole was beginning to mobilize, likely coordinating his next attempt at intimidation or retaliation. Jack's mind mapped potential scenarios, each requiring different strategies, contingencies, and levels of force. Arrived in the early evening, having gathered additional intel from contacts in nearby towns. He relayed what he had learned. Cole's network was more extensive than they initially thought. He had associates in neighboring counties, some with ties to corrupt local officials. The threat was evolving, spreading outward, and Jack understood the implications. Each day of inaction increased risk, but haste without precision could be catastrophic. Jack and prepared for the next phase. They reinforced the perimeter of the house with subtle barriers, ensuring that no intrusion would go unnoticed. Surveillance cameras were optimized, vantage points adjusted, and emergency communication protocols established. Jack moved methodically, ensuring that safety was maximized while maintaining operational control. Every possible scenario was anticipated, rehearsed, and accounted for. That night, as finally drifted into a troubled sleep, Jack sat by the window, eyes scanning the streets. His mind replayed the events of the day, the initial attack, the first strike against the gang, and now this retaliation attempt. Each encounter reinforced a truth he had always known. Violence attracted more violence, and preparedness was the only defense. He whispered into the darkness, a vow and a promise intertwined. "They'll learn. Every move they make, every threat they issue, I will anticipate, and anyone who touches her will face consequences they cannot imagine." In the quiet of Cedar Ridge, shadows shifted and stretched across the streets. Jack, retired Navy SEAL turned vigilant guardian, watched over the town with unyielding focus. He had delivered one warning strike. He had neutralized immediate threats, but the war was far from over. Cole's retaliation had only confirmed what Jack had long suspected. To protect those he loved, he would need to confront the leader himself. The first signs of escalation had arrived, and Cedar Ridge would soon realize that Jack was no longer the quiet neighbor they thought he was. He was a force of precision, calculation, and unyielding resolve. And anyone who crossed the line would discover, sooner or later, exactly what happened when you crossed a Navy SEAL. Jack moved through Cedar Ridge under the cover of darkness. His senses honed to every sound, every shadow, every flicker of movement. Weeks of surveillance, Investigation and strategic strikes had led him to this moment. Randy Cole, the man who orchestrated the attack on and terrorized the town with his gang, was finally within reach. The path to him was treacherous, lined with operatives, traps, and unpredictable variables, but Jack had accounted for every contingency. The warehouse where Cole operated was quiet, eerily so, a stark contrast to the chaos he had orchestrated in the past. Jack crouched behind a low wall, scanning the perimeter with binoculars. His previous strikes had sown confusion within Cole's network, but Jack knew the mastermind was cautious. This wasn't a man who acted recklessly. Every move was calculated, every decision deliberate. Jack allowed himself a moment to breathe, to focus, before making his move. Positioned across the street in an unmarked vehicle, tapped Jack lightly on the shoulder. They exchanged a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement that the plan had been rehearsed countless times. No words were necessary. Their understanding was precise, a shared rhythm born from years of military operations. Tonight, the strategy would be executed flawlessly. Jack moved silently toward the rear of the warehouse, avoiding security cameras and motion detectors he had identified during prior surveillance. He could hear muffled voices inside, laughter, the shuffle of movement. Cole was inside, likely surrounded by his most trusted enforcers. But Jack was not here to negotiate. He was here to deliver calculated justice. Every step was deliberate, measured, and controlled. As he entered a side door, Jack immediately assessed the situation. 4 armed men flanking Cole, who stood at a table reviewing ledgers and packages. Cole's expression was calm, almost arrogant, but Jack noted the subtle tension in his posture, a flicker of unease that betrayed awareness of the looming threat. The room smelled faintly of alcohol and tobacco, an odor Jack filed mentally as part of the environment analysis. Jack's approach was silent, like a shadow slipping across the concrete floor. One guard at the corner never had a chance. A precise strike incapacitated him without alerting the others. Another moved toward the sound, but Jack anticipated his path, neutralizing him with controlled force. Chaos began to ripple through the room, but Jack remained composed, using the confusion to his advantage. Cole's gaze finally met Jack's. Recognition, surprise, and a flash of fear crossed his face, a dangerous combination. "So, you're the ghost they've been talking about," Cole said, voice calm but with an undercurrent of threat. "I've heard about you, thought you were retired." Jack's reply was measured, cold, and unwavering. "I'm never retired from protecting what matters. You've crossed a line, Cole, and tonight you're going to face the consequences." Cole's enforcers moved simultaneously, weapons raised, but Jack had already calculated every trajectory, every angle, every possible outcome. He moved with precision, disarming the first man in seconds, leveraging momentum and technique honed from years of SEAL training. The second followed suit, neutralized before he could react. In the span of moments, the room was under Jack's control. Cole took a step back, raising his hand slightly in attempt at placation. "You think you can take me down, one man?" His voice held defiance, but Jack noticed the tension in his shoulders, the careful calculation in his eyes. Cole was a predator, but Jack was a master tactician, combining skill, experience, and an unwavering focus that few could match. Jack advanced slowly, ensuring Cole remained cornered, every movement deliberate. "It's not about one man," Jack said. "It's about justice, about consequences. You hurt her. You terrorized this town. Tonight you pay." Cole's defiance wavered as Jack moved closer. The room was silent, except for the muffled sounds of struggle from the unconscious guards and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Jack's presence was commanding, precise, and unavoidable, a force that left no room for resistance. Cole realized he was outmatched, outmaneuvered, and completely exposed. Jack's hands moved with lethal efficiency, but not recklessly. Every hold, every motion was designed to subdue without unnecessary harm. He immobilized Cole, binding him securely while keeping his eyes locked on the man who had caused so much pain. Moved in to secure the perimeter, ensuring no external interference could occur. The mastermind was finally within Jack's control. Jack reviewed the evidence spread across the table: ledgers, communications, and small arms, all meticulously catalogued and ready for law enforcement. Cole's network, while powerful, had left traces, and Jack ensured that every piece was documented to dismantle the operation permanently. There would be no loose ends, no chance for retaliation from hidden allies. Cole, restrained and aware of his defeat, attempted to speak, his voice edged with fear and anger. "You think this ends with me? Others will come, others will." Jack cut him off with a calm, unwavering tone. "This ends with you, Cole, and if anyone else steps out of line, they'll face the same consequences. I've made it very clear what happens when someone crosses a Navy SEAL. Remember that." The room fell silent. The tension, thick moments ago, dissipated under the weight of Jack's authority and precision. Cole's expression shifted from arrogance to reluctant acknowledgement. He had been outmatched, outmaneuvered, and thoroughly controlled. Outside the warehouse, radioed law enforcement, ensuring the evidence and Cole himself would be delivered without incident. Jack remained vigilant, scanning the perimeter one last time. Every detail had been accounted for, every risk mitigated. The mission was complete, yet Jack remained alert. Experience had taught him that vigilance could never be relaxed until the threat was fully neutralized. Back at home, Jack returned quietly, his presence calm yet commanding. Noticed immediately, relief washing over her as she saw him enter. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around him, and whispered, "You did it. You stopped him." Jack held her tightly, a mixture of reassurance and quiet exhaustion passing through him. "It's over," he said softly, "for now, but we stay vigilant always." Looked into his eyes and saw the depth of experience, the calm fury that had guided every strike, every decision. She realized that the man she loved was not just a protector, but a force of precision and justice. She had feared for him, but now understood the magnitude of his dedication, not just to her, but to ensuring no one else would endure what she had faced. In the days that followed, Cedar Ridge slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Randy Cole was arrested, his gang disbanded, and the town slowly regained a sense of safety. Jack remained vigilant, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. His actions had sent a message. Justice could be swift, precise, and unavoidable. Yet even in victory, Jack knew the lessons were enduring. Threats could arise anywhere, and those who believed they could harm the innocent without consequence would always discover the limits of their miscalculation. Cedar Ridge had learned, finally, that the calm exterior of a retired Navy SEAL could conceal unparalleled precision, control, and a willingness to act decisively when needed. Jack whispered to one evening, as they watched the sunset from their porch, a quiet reflection on the journey that had begun with violence but ended in justice. "No one will ever hurt you again, not while I'm here. And anyone foolish enough to cross that line will find out exactly what happens when you cross a Navy SEAL." The town remained peaceful, but Cedar Ridge would never forget the storm that had swept through their streets. A storm guided by precision, experience, and unwavering resolve. And Jack, quiet guardian and relentless warrior, had ensured that safety, once taken for granted, was restored through vigilance, discipline, and unmatched skill. The sun rose over Cedar Ridge, bathing the town in golden light. For the first time in weeks, the streets seemed calm, almost serene. The tension that had gripped the town since attack had dissipated, replaced by cautious relief. Jack walked through the neighborhood with measured steps, his gaze alert but his mind finally allowing a fraction of rest. The gang that had once terrorized the town had been dismantled. Randy Cole was behind bars, his operations neutralized. Yet Jack remained vigilant, understanding that true security was never absolute. It was earned through awareness, preparation, and discipline. Back at home, sat at the kitchen table, a cup of tea warming her hands. She looked up as Jack entered, his posture relaxed yet commanding. "Morning," she said softly, her voice carrying gratitude and relief. Jack smiled faintly, moving to sit across from her. "Morning," he replied, letting himself savor this small moment of peace. They had endured a storm together, and though the battle had ended, its echoes lingered in both of them. Jack's mind reflected on the past weeks. The initial attack, the meticulous gathering of intelligence, the calculated strikes, and the final confrontation with Cole. Each step had been deliberate, guided by training, experience, and love for. He had acted not out of vengeance, but out of necessity, protecting the innocent, restoring balance, and ensuring that justice was served. It had been a path fraught with risk, but one he would follow again if required. Reached across the table, taking Jack's hand in hers. "You saved me and this town," she said quietly. "I don't know how I'll ever thank you." Jack squeezed her hand gently, a mixture of reassurance and tenderness. "You don't have to, just live your life. Safe, free, and never forget that you're stronger than anyone who tries to harm you." The town began to heal. Neighbors who had once whispered about the mysterious guardian in Cedar Ridge now looked at Jack with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. The fear that had shadowed the streets was gone, replaced with a sense of hope and renewal. Parents walked their children to school without anxiety, shopkeepers reopened their doors with a renewed sense of security, and the community slowly reclaimed its sense of normalcy. But Jack's presence remained a quiet reminder that safety was not passive. It was maintained through vigilance, preparation, and courage. He continued to patrol, not aggressively but with awareness. Cedar Ridge had seen what could happen when evil was left unchecked, and they respected the calm strength of the man who had restored order. Jack's actions had sent a clear message. Justice could be swift, precise, and unavoidable when the innocent were threatened. One evening, Jack walked along the outskirts of town, the air crisp and filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. The memory of past violence lingered, but so did the feeling of resilience. Leaned on Jack, her head resting against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about going back?" she asked softly. She meant returning to normal life without the constant vigilance, without the shadows that had defined the past weeks. Jack paused, considering her question. "I've walked through darker places than this," he said. "I've seen what's possible when people are unprepared. I'll always carry that with me. But for now, this is home and it's safe. We'll protect it together." Smiled, reassured by his presence. She understood that Jack's sense of duty was not a burden. It was an extension of who he was, a man shaped by discipline, training, and unyielding resolve. And she knew that while danger could never be entirely erased, with Jack by her side, they could face whatever challenges life presented. In the following weeks, the legal system dealt with Cole and his remaining associates. Evidence meticulously collected by Jack and ensured that the network was dismantled, leaving no opportunity for the gang to regroup. Cole's arrogance had crumbled under Jack's calculated strategy, and the town's citizens witnessed the tangible results of justice achieved without unnecessary chaos or destruction. The sense of empowerment and safety permeated Cedar Ridge, reinforcing a collective understanding. Evil might rise, but it could be defeated when courage, strategy, and precision were applied. Jack remained in contact, debriefing the events, analyzing outcomes, and ensuring that any residual threats were neutralized. Impressed yet unsurprised, remarked, "You didn't just protect, you rewrote the rules for anyone thinking they could prey on Cedar Ridge." Jack simply nodded. The quiet weight of responsibility settled over him. It was not glory he sought, but certainty, that the town he loved and the woman he protected would remain safe. Returned to work, gradually reclaiming her independence and confidence. The subtle tremors of fear that once lingered faded as she realized the threat had truly been eliminated. Each step she took, each interaction, was a reminder of resilience, courage, and the unwavering protection that Jack embodied. She had been through terror, but emerged stronger, fortified by the knowledge that justice could prevail even in a world shadowed by violence. As the days turned into weeks, Jack's vigilance softened but never disappeared. He maintained a quiet routine, training, observation, and preparation, not out of obsession, but as a testament to the discipline that had always defined him. Understood this, accepting that part of Jack's nature was a shield for those he loved, a readiness to act decisively whenever necessary. Their partnership, forged in the fires of adversity, was stronger than ever. One evening, sitting together on the porch, spoke again. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, voice tinged with curiosity. "All of it, the danger, the planning, the fighting." Jack considered her question, watching the last rays of sunlight shimmer across the horizon. "Regret isn't a word for what I do," he said. "Every action I took, every risk I accepted, was for you, for us, for everyone who couldn't defend themselves. The danger was real, but so was the need to act. I don't regret protecting what matters." Leaned against him, finding comfort in his unwavering presence. "And now?" "Now," Jack replied, voice calm but resolute, "we live, we heal, and we remain vigilant just in case the world decides to test us again. But for now, we enjoy the peace we've earned." Cedar Ridge returned fully to life, its streets bustling, shops open, and people moving without fear. The shadow of Cole's reign had lifted, replaced by a sense of empowerment and unity. Jack remained an invisible guardian, respected and unspoken of by most, but silently ensuring that peace endured. And in the quiet moments when the world seemed still, Jack reflected on the journey. From the moment was attacked, through the strikes, confrontations, and strategies, to the final resolution. Each step had been deliberate, precise, and guided by a principle he had never abandoned. Protect the innocent, act decisively, and ensure that those who believed they could harm others would face consequences beyond imagination. He whispered to one final time, as they watched the stars emerge above Cedar Ridge, a promise that lingered like a vow in the night air. "No one will ever hurt you again, and anyone who dares to cross that line will learn exactly what happens when they face a Navy SEAL." The town slept peacefully. The storms of violence had passed, leaving only the calm, enduring presence of a man who embodied vigilance, precision, and unyielding justice. Jack and lives returned to normal, but with a new understanding. True safety was earned, courage was tested, and the calm exterior of one man could be the difference between fear and freedom. Cedar Ridge had survived, stronger than before, because one man refused to stand by. And for Jack, the battle was never about glory. It was about protecting what mattered most. The night was quiet, the stars shining above, and Cedar Ridge, for the first time in a long while, slept without fear.